Let's continue the discussion from the panelists in South Florida to our pundits who are scattered just around the United States. Dick Morris, via Skype in Connecticut, is still with us, as is Reagan biographer Craig Shirley. And we now welcome in from Utica, New York, John Zogby, who has taken his share of polls and also taught political history. So, John, as the newcomer, you get dibs tonight. We have yet to get your first impression. Who won the night, in your opinion?
I think Marco Rubio did, and I think followed by a very strong Carly Fiorina and a stronger than usual John Kasich. I thought those were the three winners. Not sure that there are game changers tonight. Big, huge bumps in the polls. I think it's almost irrelevant to talk about debate performances and Ben Carson and Donald Trump. They seem to be immune to debate performances. But I think the big loser tonight was Jeb Bush. It could be because he just has so much baggage. Maybe the family has already had one too many presidents. But whatever it is, he just is not able to break through.
Well, let me turn to you, Dick Morris, about what we saw from Carly Fiorina. Her name has not really come up tonight until just being mentioned there by John Zogby. But I watched Ms. Fiorina. She is very much in command of the facts and the figures. It gave her prominence and gave her a boom, or a boomlet, I guess we could say, earlier on in this campaign that has subsequently drifted away. Can she regain her momentum based on her performance tonight?
No, I think she did a competent job. But once people are for you and then they turn against you, they're probably not coming back because the concerns about Hewlett-Packard and all of that is still there. But there were two very important moments in the debate that I want to call attention to, both relating to Ted Cruz. One, as I mentioned earlier, is when he advocated the gold standard. That really is a tremendously new issue, a new position for a presidential candidate, and really one that will strike resonance. But the other has been the classic argument against immigration throughout American history. It was why the Irish opposed the Chinese coming in. It was why the British opposed the Irish coming in. They're always going to take away our jobs because they'll work for next to nothing. And here, Cruz revived that argument, and I think it's a very effective one. And I think that it is the key to the Republican Party stealing the old Reagan Democratic blue-collar vote, because clearly the policy of open borders is an elitist one, along with free trade, which he also talked about. And you can really use that to clean up the blue-collar Democratic vote and make it go Republican. And I thought Cruz did a great job of pushing those arguments.
Craig Shirley, you're our resident Reagan historian. Does this restore the link with the Reagan Democrats, as Dick Morris suggests, Senator Cruz setting up the cause and effect, and the numbers showing that every new job has basically gone to someone who has come here via immigration in recent years?
Well, I think Dick is onto something. It's just that the Republican Party, since the time of Reagan, has lost touch with the Reagan Democrat. They drift in and out of the party. They're the most untethered voters, probably of all. They were obviously tethered to Reagan in 1980, 1984, but they've gone back and forth between other presidential candidates in the over the past 20, 30 years. I think that, but also some of the, that Marco Rubio saying we need more welders than philosophers in America, also made a good stab at attracting more the blue-collar, the Reagan Democrats back to the party, at least giving the idea that the party is shedding the big bank elitism of the Bush administration and Bushism, and getting back to its natural roots of being more, Nixon, Reagan, blue-collar, middle American, silent majority, say what you will. of making an overt appeal to those voters again.
This interesting dynamic. John Zogby, I need to get you in on this thing because you certainly know Democrat Party politics. Are we going to see the resurrection of the Reagan Democrats based on the immigration issue?
No, I don't think so. It's an issue that is very important in some pockets. It's a great noise issue for ideological conservatives, but it really does risk bordering, despite the best efforts of Ted Cruz, of sounding harsh and shrill. It does sound first of all, to Latinos and to other, first and second generation Americans following immigration. It sounds like it's anti-immigrant, and it's hard to package. Secondly, I am aware of the fact that I'm sure my colleagues are too, that John Kasich and Jeb Bush actually got some pretty good applause tonight when they talked about just the sheer impracticality of deportation of millions of people. This whole notion needs to be disaggregated about taking away American jobs. Because Americans, and especially American kids and those starting out, are not going to be deboning chickens and are not going to be picking lettuce and are not going to be chambermaids in cheap motels. And so in that sense,
I tell you what, Dick Morris, I can tell you want to get in on this.
Why not? The only reason that they're not going to be doing that is the wages are dirt cheap. And the only reason the wages are dirt cheap is because of the illegal immigrants who are willing to take those jobs. If you forced those wages to be reasonable by cutting off the supply of illegal immigrants, those would absolutely be jobs Americans would take. The Census Bureau publishes the number of full-time employees every year and breaks them down into American-born and foreign-born. Foreign-born includes all categories of immigration, legal and illegal. They've showed that since the year 2000, there has been zero growth in full-time employment for American-born and about an 8% increase for foreign-born. And I think that Cruz, in opening that door and really talking about the impact of immigration in holding down wages and taking away jobs, is opening a tremendous wedge. Just 1 second, look at the history of the issue. Reagan Democrats were invented because Reagan pushed a cut in taxes. Then Obama came in and he bifurcated the system and said, I'll cut taxes on the average person, but raise them on the rich. And that lost the Reagan Democrats. They went back to the Democratic Party because they were voting on a class basis. Now, when you can deal with the immigration issue, you can reopen the issue for Reagan Democrats in a way that I think will be enormously effective. I think this is the killer issue for the future.
Craig Shirley, we heard John Zogby really offer two parts of the argument. One, he talked about the disaggregation of what goes on with labor numbers, but the other thing he talked about was the collective sensibility of the Latino community. I call that the myth of the monolith, and Ted Cruz embodies it when he talks tough about immigration and the economic circumstances. Your take on what you've heard from your colleagues there, both from John Zogby and Dick Morris on this question?
Well, I think Ted Cruz is the most authoritative figure on the stage tonight as the child of immigrants, and I think he expressed it best. Is that one thing we haven't explored is the difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration, and those who are here legally, who are seeing their wages being dragged down by illegal immigrants. I don't think that that legal immigrants think of themselves as somehow being part of some breaking and entering conspiracy. So that there's going to be a bifurcation, as was suggested earlier, between the two, and I think that needs to be explored more because there is a difference in voting behavior, in attitudes and political behavior between legal immigrants and illegal immigrants.
Gentlemen, there was another dispute on stage tonight. It had to do with national security, with spending, and with our military. It took place between Florida Senator Marco Rubio and Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. We're going to take a look at that and then get your reaction.
I know that Rand is a committed isolationist. I'm not. I believe the world is a stronger and a better place when the United States is the strongest military power in the world.
Marco, how is it conservative? How is it conservative to add $1 trillion expenditure for the federal government that you're not paying for? How is it conservative? How is it conservative to add $1 trillion in military expenditures? You cannot be a conservative if you're going to keep promoting new programs that you're not going to pay for.
I may respond more quickly, very quickly, Senator. We can't even have an economy if we're not safe. There are radical jihadists in the Middle East beheading people and crucifying Christians. A radical Shia cleric in Iran trying to get a nuclear weapon. The Chinese taking over the South China Sea. Yes, I believe the world is a safer... No, I don't believe. I know that the world is a safer and better place when America is the strongest military power in the world.
All right, let's go back to our panel and get their opinions. Dick Morris, who got the better of that argument?
Well, it's a stacked argument. The American people overwhelmingly would side with Rubio on that and against Paul. It's the reason that Rand Paul, after an initially really strong campaign, never really registered in the polls because he's seen correctly, I think, as an isolationist. But I do believe that he was very effective in coming after Rubio on the issue of the budget, particularly the child tax credit. And let me just give you a little background on that. The reason that in America, over 50% of the people do not pay any income tax is because of the child tax credit that George W. Bush passed. And Rubio would extend that. It's called a refundable tax credit, but it's not. It's a welfare check. It's called a tax credit because if you pay taxes, it's a credit against it. But if you don't pay taxes, which the vast majority of people who would take it do not, it's a welfare check. It's just another thing that comes in the mail. It's an entitlement and would be a huge expansion of the entitlement culture. And I think that that Paul was very effective in really showing up Rubio on that. But I want to just come back to another question. The big question that hangs over me as I saw this debate is what the hell is holding Ben Carson up? You look at this guy, and there's no way that he's a presidential candidate. There isn't the power there. There isn't the strength there. When he talks about national defense, it's like he's painting by numbers. He obviously doesn't know what he's talking about the economy or about national defense. And why should he? It's not his field. And I just can't, for the life of me, understand it.
Well, you raised the topic, Dick, and so let's take a look. I've got my own theories about this, both his intellect and the fact that he's an accomplished neurosurgeon, but his simple decency. For example, tonight, the question came up, should presidential candidates be vetted? And after all the controversy surrounding Dr. Carson, here's the way he put it tonight during the debate.
Well, first of all, thank you for not asking me what I said in the 10th grade. I appreciate that. The fact of the matter is, you know, what we should vet all candidates. I have no problem with being vetted. What I do have a problem with is being lied about and then putting that out there as truth.
Now, the crowd erupted to that, and John Zogby, it goes back to something you mentioned earlier this week on Newsmax Prime. You're a guy who's lectured on political history in addition to conducting polling, and you said the other night that independents and non-conservatives are reacting to what they deem as unfair press coverage. Does this remain a winning issue for Dr. Ben Carson?
It remains a winning issue. I don't know how long it's sustainable. I agree with Dick. At some point, he's going to have to show his stuff. I don't think he has any stuff, frankly. I think he's making it up as he goes along. But this was clearly, that clip was the high point of his evening. That was a witty line, but it was also a searing line as well. He was running against an unfair media, and I think for that reason, you know, no runs, no hits, no errors. He shows up in next week's polls in the same position he's been in.
Well, let's go back to something. And Craig Shirley, I hear this from my good friends, and yeah, you know, I'm a recovering politician, but do we have a tendency to look at guys who are polished or turn a phrase and discount people of accomplishment in other areas like Ben Carson? I guess my question is this, Craig, and we got about a minute and a half to answer it. Will Dr. Ben Carson continue to surprise and confound typical political observers?
Yeah, I think he will, JD. I mean, obviously, this is the most fluid nomination in many a year, maybe since 1968, when actually there were about 13 candidates seeking the nomination before Richard Nixon actually won it. Is that he is still a story, he's still a phenomenon, he's still a novelty. In many ways, maybe he's, you know, he and Trump are Cain and Abel to each other. You know, one's the aggressor, one's more passive. But they both still have compelling stories, just in different ways. I mean, Trump is not a typical politician, and Carly Fiorina is not a typical politician. And they still, you know, continue to dominate most of the discussion and some of the polls. So I think it's just an entire frustration with the Washington system. And you heard it today, you know, with the revulsion to Dodd-Frank and community banks and big banks and what big banks are doing and big lobbyists, is that the Republican Party is going through profound changes right now, and it's making the people who make up the party, the conservatives, Tea Party, are willing to entertain non-traditional politicians that maybe in the past they wouldn't.
The bottom line is there is a frustration and an impatience with what is going on. And gentlemen, there is the clock on the wall that affects us all. John Zogby, Dick Morris, Craig Shirley, we thank you for weighing in.